Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
To welcome Professor Michael Welker. I know a number of you have met Professor Welker already because he's here on sabbatical based in the Divinity Faculty, and he'll be here until the end of June. Michael is the Professor of Systematic Theology at the University of Heidelberg and has written an enormous number of books on theology, but more recently he has become very engaged in the whole science from religion discussion, has written a book together with John Polkinghorne is here, and we have that book there on the bookstall. I hope you might browse some of those. And has also, since 2006, been building up the global network of research centres for theology, religious and Christian studies. And so that is another project that he's been very much involved in. So today, Professor Welker is going to speak to us on science and religion, or science and theology. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind invitation to speak in this series of lectures at the Faraday Institute. In the following, I would like to make a few comments why this topic was chosen, say a few words about my background and interest in this discourse, then we'll speak about what speaks for the labels, the two, and what speaks against them, and finally we'll share some reflections on the inner texture of truth-seeking communities, both in the sciences and in theology and religious studies. So first, why this topic? The answer is short, because a colleague from Cambridge who is in this discourse has been in this discourse for a long time, knows my own work and knows the Faraday Institute very well, recommended it to me. And I think we are focusing here on two labels which stand for contemporary dialogues, conflicts, research interests, vague and clear hopes and fears, and it might make sense to sort it out. What is behind that? Why has the theology and science, science label be of a minor weight, a minor importance? Why is the Templeton Foundation, also the Faraday Institute, interested to keep up the science and religion label? So I think it's worthwhile to investigate this in the following minutes. Then about the background and interest, it might, when I give some arguments for the theology and science discourse, it might be might raise the worry that I speak pro domo. I'm coming from a theological faculty. I'm a systematic theologian. My background is theology and philosophy. These were the academic qualifications I gained. After these qualifications, I did I wrote a post-academic book on the work of Alfred North Whitehead, mathematician and philosopher of science, who worked here at Trinity College, then had a phase of a career in London, where he became interested in the role of mathematics in higher education, in the co-evolution of scientific, religious, aesthetic and ethical work over the centuries. So he was very sophisticated in a multi-systemic approach towards cultural evolutions, in which science plays a very important role, but not the only role. After this work on Whitehead, I started to gain interest into the science and theology discourse, in which I have been involved now for almost a quarter of a century. So we had different enterprises. We had meta-level discourse. We investigated models of science and theology, or science and religion, discourses across the globe, in Berkeley, in Cambridge, in Zurich, in Heidelberg, in Marburg, and in other places. And I will share a few reflections on that. We had more recently, organized by John Polkinghorne and John Zizioulas, discourse on relational ontology. So this was also reflections on very basic meta-theoretical discourses. We had a multi-year discourse on divine agency and temporality, reflections on creation models in science and theology, God, matter and information. Then more theologically centered, a multi-year international and interdisciplinary group on eschatology. We published a book with a nice title, The End of the World and the Ends of God, Science and Theology on Eschatology. We had a follow-up discourse on science and theology on the resurrection. So if resurrection is not resuscitation, what reality is it then? We had various discourses, and still have it, in the area of anthropology and on kenotic love even. Now we have a running discourse with Chinese scholars, which we hope to bring into multi-year reflection on love and law, key concepts of the Confucian traditions, also important in the Jewish Christian traditions, and interesting concepts to reach out to the sciences. And finally, we started for the first time a science and theology discourse in which we also drew in law scholars, concepts of law in science, legal studies, and theology. So it's a rich field in which we are operating. And this field and these experiences form the background of the following comments I'd like to give on these reasons to prefer one or the other label. So there are first very good reasons to prefer the label science and religion over against science and theology discourse. Very good reasons. And the first reasons are guided by fears and worries. Fears and worries that science and theology is too narrow, too limited. Theology, for many people, is mostly associated with Christian theology, or even one discipline of Christian theology, namely systematic theology, my own field. So, and this is far too narrow, it is argued. Where are the other religions? Second, the second reason, which comes with some worry, is that the personal engagement and the commitment of faith correlated with theology does not agree with scientific objectivity. So in this respect, people say, well, at least religious studies, which can be done from a more detached point of view, are more helpful than theology. They are more objective. So these are the two key worries, and I will deal with these worries a little later. We then have, beyond these worries, also programmatic stances, saying, well, science and religion is much more adequate to deal with the situation. And the most programmatic stance I found is in the Oxford Handbook of Religion and Science, 2006, edited by Philip Clayton, by Chicago colleague Hefner, a Lutheran colleague, and he says, I quote him, religion and science is a novel emergent in our time. Religion and science is a novel emergent in our time, expressing the human struggle for the meaning of the world in relation to that which is most important. So religion and science, a novel emergent, expressing the human struggle for the meaning of the world in relation to that which is most important. Well, here personally, I have some big question marks, I must confess. We had these emergents in relation to religion and politics, not only in my own country. We had them less dramatically with relation to religion and arts or religion education. Today we see them not very well reflected with religion and media. So just to see two areas of knowledge and power, bring them together, speak of a new emergent, might very easily feed a scientism, as we call it. You know, this ideology that says, well, all that is valid and true is related to the sciences. The only valid truth claims can be supported by scientific research and the exploration of nature. And it can very easily breed a self-secularization that we see in many religious discourses. So we try to help each other out with this new emergent science and religion by just these two. And do not strengthen each other, but maybe weaken each other in a complicated way, turning what makes science strong into a kind of loaded quasi-worldview ideological form, and trying to rest religion on an alliance with science which might partly help but partly distort. So in this respect I have a great reservation to say, well, no, we are not talking about an academic discourse, but we are talking about a new emergent in which two power codes, two power structures are fused into a kind of new form that stands guard of the care of meaning, what is most important. Already the most important rhetoric is not that helpful. We have seen these struggles for the queen of the sciences. You know, for a long time it was philosophy that claimed to be most important, and in some areas it was religion that claimed to be most important. And I don't think that these are very helpful rhetorics. But then we have the science and religion label in a programmatic way for a strong plea for a meta-discourse. Of course, people are aware there is no such thing as the religion and the science. And most people are also aware that science and religion discourse in the following: Buddhism and chemistry, Hindu folk religions and physics, Pentecostalism and neurophysiology, doesn't make much sense. These would be science and religion discourses. Yeah. But these discourses, everybody is very aware. Well, then we are mixing complexities that, at least at the current phase of history, will not bring about a lot of insights, generate a lot of fruitful insights. So people say, well, there is not such thing as the religion and the science, but we should do meta-discourses about the conditions of the discourse. And we have seen a lot of fruitful work. Ian Barber was one of these, but he had many helpful followers. That you think about models of relating these two areas. We also have seen a few reflections, and I think we should see more on that, that compare scientistic worldview and religious worldviews, which have the tone of becoming ideological or might be just careful worldviews. To compare these, but we haven't enough of this. So we a kind of critical look on the Dawkins discourse, awaiting what is valid, where are valid fears behind this aggressive evaluation of the religions, and where is it just, you know, wrestling with childhood traumata and whatever. So I think these psychoanalytics, socioanalytic reflections could also have the brand of science and religion. But I think most of us involved here would not go into this direction. So to analyze pathologies or helpful worldviews and to compare them. So this would be more ideological critique, and you have to engage sociologists, cultural studies, and so on this meta level. What we have seen more on the level of meta discourses were methodological approaches, and some of my reflections will move into this direction. So these are valid proposals to say, well, we fear the narrowness of a theological approach, being too Christian, being too heavily personally engaged, and so we would like to go on a more reflexive stance, and we are also very interested to have some meta-theoretical clarification before we enter the discourse. However, on the basis of a multi-year experience, one has to judge that these mere meta-level discourses had a short life. So when we compared models in different parts of the world, those discourses who simply stood on the level of a meta-discourse died after a few years. So they had exhausted what was in the theoretical possibilities. And the vibrant discourses always were topically centered. They had to focus on a topic. I like very much a quote by Beckett, "Are you merely interested in everything or also in something specific?" I think it is crucial that the theology and science discourse is interested in something specific. That makes it much more complicated, much slower. Yeah? It's much more complicated if you reflect on specific issues and try to locate them in both areas of knowledge. But if you're merely standing on a meta level, you easily end up with a popular philosophy which doesn't serve either side. Then you develop some insights which are floating a little bit above the spheres, but and people say, yeah, somehow you're right, somehow I see it, but if it now comes really to my work in the scientific community or in the community of those who reflect on religion in the academy, you name it theology, religious studies, or however, then it's not really satisfactory. So topicality is crucial. Another plea to focus on the reflexive institutions in the academy, whether you name them theology or religious studies, but clearly a reflexive academic institution, is that we have seen interesting historical shifts in the global discourse in theology and science. So what for the outside perspective was, oh yeah, here the scientists and the religiously minded people, the theologians are sitting together, well, it was much more subtle. So we saw a phase that Ted Peters, in his book Science and Theology in New Consonants, termed the method phase, a phase that was very strongly concerned with meta-theoretical discourses. We have then seen a physics phase, where we had strong interaction between physicists and philosophy and systematic theologians, which had some philosophical training, and this is how I got into this discourse. We then saw biologists coming in, and the discourse got much more complicated. Now, when you are dealing with a physicist, you can rejoice in the order of the cosmos. And the biologists come in, life lives at the expense of other lives, brothers and sisters. You know, it's not that easy. So theology cannot just praise the rhythms, the wonderful rhythms with the Psalms and then embrace the physicists and rejoice in the good order of the world. Then we see that the windows onto reality, as John Welker named it, show light and darkness. But then, of course, you enter into different areas of religious thinking and theology. And then it's very helpful, and we did this, to bring in historians and biblical scholars. So it's no longer just theism. No, we have to look a little bit deeper. The all-determining subject doesn't help us. Theodicy becomes too heavy on the back. Yeah? So we have to go into deeper levels of religious and theological thinking, and we have to draw in more sources. So we saw with the biology phase, change of the whole texture of the discourse. Now we got bold and said, well, it's possible to engage with biblical scholars and historians without blurring the whole discourse, and so we drew in more fields. So up now, legal studies, which brings in different complexity, historians, chemistry was not very easy the first encounters, because they bring in new systematic types of thought, and they bring in new challenges to develop very subtle modes of relating and integrating, building small bridges. But here we see on the whole an historical shift in the discourse. And it's very important to observe this. And not just say, well, you know, we have two sides and we have these basic stances towards each other, but to see that whomever you bring in areas of knowledge, whatever topic you bring in, you see a shift in the discourse. Enrichment, endangerment, and so on. So finally, the problem of the personal commitment. The other thing that seems to speak against theology and science. Here again, I think it is very important to reflect the types of personal commitment, and to bring them into an academic discourse. The old style dual that scholars like Bultmann in my own country created, and which had a strong impact on broader publics, was science goes with the objectivity, theology with the subjectivity. Yeah. Facts and meaning, all these kind of unhelpful duals. Very unhelpful duals. But our popular culture is still obsessed with these duals, and minds like Dawkins are feeding on these prejudices. A closer look, I think, shows that neither in science nor in theology you can do any meaningful research without personal commitment. If you're just, of course, you can do grammars, you can do historical investigations in theology, where you can get rid of any personal commitment. I just do my job. I just investigate, you know, what happened in this phase. We are digging this out, and so on and so on. But as soon as you have a real scholar, you see personal commitment. You know, what we are doing here serves these purposes. Even with these seemingly boring grammatical investigations, we want to read more carefully what is going on. We want to go into deeper meanings. When we dig out these walls, we want to see more about the socio-cultural environment of these persons who live there, and so on and so on. So even with those things who are most distant, or seem to be most distant from personal commitment, a closer investigation shows you that serious work, and I think, I'm not a scientist by upbringing, but I think our scientist colleagues could give us similar stories. And this then leads to an interesting texture that we discovered in theology, and which then opens the doors to an understanding of a wonderful phrase, truth-seeking communities. So when people talk about theology, most people think of a well-organized corpus of thoughts. The theology of Luther, the theology of Calvin, the theology of these confessional writings. And then it's almost like a big castle, which you can only enter from here and there. You get a few things, you need a lot of time, you have to study for years, and so on and so on. A whole connection of thoughts and convictions. But then we have in theology, and particularly in the Protestant traditions from where I come, this idea that everybody should be a theologian. We all are ennobled to do theology. So if you write these big theologies in big letters, we have a theology in small letters. But what is this theology in small letters all about? Is it anything? Any remark on God? The word God has so and so many letters? No. Just a pious sigh? So theology, even in this minimalist way, comes with qualifications. It has to show a minimum, at least, of personally being touched. Or at least respect for those who, well, I think these people are after something. This personal, existential commitment. And on the other hand, it has to be able to speak out, to articulate, so that other people can listen, agree, disagree, can continue the thought. And this can be done in a very minimalist way. But these two elements have to come together. Personal commitment and the ability to explicate in a reasonable, understandable way. Very often, people in the church see the first element lacking, with us theologians. And quite some time we have a feeling, well, in the piety out there, there is a lack to be able to articulate and to engage in a discourse. But if you see, well, even a minimum theology has to bring these two elements together. Then you can open the door to understand what truth-seeking communities are all about. Truth-seeking communities are neither communities who are just whistling in the dark. I'm looking for some truth. Truth-seeking communities are not those, on the other hand, who say, we found the truth, and yet then you all please listen, I declare. Truth-seeking communities are those who raise truth claims and then develop modes to investigate these truth claims and develop modes on which they can agree, they negotiate. What counts as a testing, a valid testing of your truth claims? And on the basis of these truth claims are, and here I bring back theology in this minimum way, on the basis of this is, of course, individual certainty and conviction. Individual certainty and conviction. But this alone is not truth. In modernity, modern minds very often confuse this. I'm convinced this is truth. They love this quote of Luther in front of the emperor and I think it was 30 or 40 princes and peers and 50 bishops and so on and so on. Here I stand. God with me, amen. Protestant certainty. The true quote is, if I'm not convinced by arguments of scripture, on overt arguments of reason, I am bound, my conscience is bound. Here I stand. Yeah, total different stance. So it's not just my certainty, no, it's a grounded certainty. And here comes the other side. You need certainty, conviction, personal conviction, the strong emotional element in us. This strive for consensus, that we bring other people into this, we join each other. But there is this awareness, certainty alone. Can be consensus? Can a whole age, a whole guild can be in error. I like this quote that I got from John Polkinghorne, my cosmological friends were often in error and never in doubt. My theological friends too were often in error and never in doubt, and so was I. So certainty, consensus is very important, but on the other hand, the growth of insight, correct insight, is most important. And here you see that we have a dual development of growth in truth-seeking communities. We are aiming at an intensification of certainty and consensus, and at the same time, of an intensification of cognitive insight. And both areas have a critical impact on each other. I get a new insight out of our discussion. and I have to test my certainty, our consensus. There are insights which speak against my convictions, and I doubt whether we have got enough material or whether we got the right perspective on these things. Both, they grow. They mutually intensify each other. And these are the strategies of truth-seeking communities. They want to co-enhance personal certainty, consensus, and topical insight. And when you look at this broad spectrum of truth-seeking communities in their inner texture, you see that we need all theories of truth in order to make sense of them. Those of you who are interested in philosophical traditions knows that we have either coherence theories of truth, or consensus theories of truth, or correspondence theories of truth. Yeah. And with the schema that I just presented to you, you need all three elements. The consensus theory of truth is not strong enough. We can have strong consensus. The famous sentence, Securus judicat orbis terrarum, the whole earth cannot err, is wrong. And the coherence theory of truth in itself is also not valid alone. We see pathological minds which show you an astounding coherence. Now, I have the theory, this conspiracy theory, and I tell you, and here is another proof and another proof and another proof, and then you see, or we have seen philosophies which dominated an age. Yeah? So I endured 2 years at a Fichte altar trying to discover a theory of self-consciousness that solved all problems with one principle, overcoming the Kant distortion between theory and praxis, getting one principle, forget all the details of stupid anthropology. Here we have this one idea. Yeah? Coherence. Yeah? Admiration. Great coherence. When I was a young assistant to Jürgen Moltmann, one day I said, oh, you know, here, it was meant to be a little critical, Gogarten, he is of a coherence, that is wonderful. He was one of our leading theological scholars, probably nobody of you knew, but Gogarten and Bultmann, these were the two great scholars of the Antibartian move. And Moltmann very calmly said, it's easy to be coherent if you have only two thoughts. So coherence alone doesn't help. But of course, we have to have coherence. And finally, the correspondence theory is very, very important, that our own intellectual cognitive approaches fit the test of historical, experimental, and other investigations. So with the truth-seeking communities, you have to bring in all three theories of truth. You have to organize processes of growth in certainty and consensus. You can't get rid of this element of inner conviction and certainty, though, so there is no such thing as plain objectivity. Yeah. But you, of course, also need topical insight. And this is the reason why some of us think that we should, when we look at theology and science, be very keen on having academic disciplines involved on both sides. And for this, in our orbit, stands theology, the reflection of religious traditions, academically based, historically, systematically, and in other forms structured and organized, and that we should make sure that we have in any discourse between science and, on the other side, also an academically cultivated and established and controlled discipline. This is why some people, as long as what stands under the rubric of religion, remain a little reserved and say, well, what do you mean by religion? Yeah. It cannot be Buddhism and chemistry. Yeah. It cannot be Calvinism and biology. So what do you mean by that? So, and if you want to have a reflexive, academically tested and cultivated and established instance, please name it. But the reserves I mentioned in the beginning that very easily theology can stand for just one area in the Christian academic orbit, that it might privilege too strongly personal convictions and might lose the area of objectivity. These are strong concerns. I tried to unfold that when we look at these academic disciplines, these concerns can be met. But I think that this kind of hesitation between these, using these two labels, can also, and the argumentation whether we should use the one or the other, can also be a fruitful stimulus to cultivate our interdisciplinary ventures. I myself, not only because I'm a theologian and am in a faculty of theology, will continue to use the label theology and science for my contributions to the discourse. And I tried to give some good reasons for that. But I'm also very open to listen to other reasons which cultivate religious studies or other fields to harbor, to host this most important discourse in an adequate way. And I think it is very important that this way is an academically cultivated one. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much, Michael. We've got some good time for discussion, which is great. So over to you to fire a few questions and make a few points. So, yeah.
Now, I wanted to press you on one of your latter statements where you said there's no such thing as objectivity. But it seems to me that in some areas there is. If I say that the speed of sound in air at a given pressure and temperature humidity is 300 meters per second, it's no good everybody agreeing it's 200 meters a second, because it isn't, and you can go and test it. So what do you mean by no such thing as objectivity in a scientific endeavour?
I hope I didn't say this. I'm not a fool in my own language, so I might have made some mistakes. But I wanted to argue that in scientific investigations, there is no disconnection of personal certainty and conviction from objective insights. So the gaining of objective insights is driven by this search for truth in a field. But there are, of course, there are objective insights, and same in theology. So we are dating archaeological findings, and we are testing rational arguments, and then they very often are settled for centuries. The insights. No, there's no. I'm not speaking against objective findings and processes of objectivization. I think what I tried to explain are that we have two processes in each academic venture. The one, the drive for personal certainty, conviction, and consensus, and the other, the search for accurate, consistent, reliable, and in this way, objective knowledge.
Okay, John, yes.
I mean, perhaps the point is that there is no way of looking at the world, looking at reality, that is independent of your particular location. Everybody looks at the world from a point of view. That's true in science. There are very interesting scientific facts, but not very interpreted facts. Sometimes the interpretations can be uncontentious. Sometimes they can be contentious or even distorting. And of course, that's obviously also true in theology. There is no Archimedean point, or no. Everything is a view from somewhere, and nothing is a view from nowhere, independent of starting point. Would you agree, Michael?
No, of course. There's a deep contextuality of all our strivings, and I wanted to argue for an academically controlled contextuality. That's very important. So that we do not allow for naivety, saying, well, here I stand, and that's my inner conviction, and this is, and I'm totally convicted, and therefore it's true. So this is the pure subjectivity on the other hand, but on the other side, we have seen an enormous boom in Jesus research, fueled by archaeology archaeologists' successes. And they were great, you know. They really dug out the Bethesda things and all sorts of evidence for the biblical histories of the New Testament, but they in themselves don't give us the life of Jesus. It's very so when some of these colleagues come and say, well, no, I walk where Jesus walked, and so you have the feeling, well, you have an objectivist illusion here. Yeah? You dug something out, but this alone doesn't help you. But of course we don't question after some commitments. Well, some are still contested whether they found the house of Peter's mother and whether this was a synod where Jesus really preached, and so these are interesting things. We listen to what is going on, but others are simply evident, and we are pretty sure that it's very unlikely that this will be questioned in future history of humankind. These are objective insights.
Can I follow up a little bit on a parallel theme? So I very much agree with your statement that when, for example, scientists and theologians are sitting around the table and they want to have a dialogue together, they're all bringing to the table all kinds of personal convictions. They all believe things and all kinds of stuff. Now, in practice, and you've been involved in a lot of these dialogues, I mean, do you think it's better for these to emerge, as it were, during the dialogue and during the discussion? Or do you think there's value actually, let's say at the beginning of a workshop or a conference, where people actually bring these out and that you actually spend time actually bringing these out into the open to start with on day one in the morning, and then you have your discussion afterwards? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, as to how that works?
Well, it depends. If you have more philosophically trained and sophisticated colleagues, this kind of meta-reflection in the beginning might help. We made the discovery that it depends very much on the topic, what kind of meta-frameworks we have to bring in. And the genius of these discourses is that you have scientists and theologians involved, which do not come in and say, well, this is my method, but say, oh, with this topic, we could activate these and these theoretical resources to make better sense of it. And in the light of what you just said as a chance or a problem, we could explore this or that. So very often I had these, well, two images are very strong on my mind in these discourses. One is that we are building very small bridges. Very small bridges. Yeah. So very often people come in and want us to turn the big light switch from dark to light. Yeah? No, this is or bring together the minds. No. We are building very small bridges. And the other thing is, very often we get helpful, well, how is it when you have these ships and they have cannonballs going and you have the feeling, well, we shouldn't move on, you know, otherwise we are hit by a cannonball. Yeah? So very often we have these helpful warnings and say, no, but if you go in this direction, we are lost. Yeah? So then we are out of the discourse. And this is also very, very good for us. Yeah? So you cannot violate these and these rules. Yeah? And so the discourse is much of this kind of helpful warning, don't go in this direction. Yeah? So for example, for us in eschatology, it was a very helpful thing when scientists said, we need continuity and discontinuity. If we don't have continuity, we are out. Yeah? If eschatology is just wishful imagination and draw more out of the apocalypse and so, then we are. And then we discovered, it's interesting, all the big eschatological symbols have both. New heaven, new earth, discontinuity. But why do they speak of heaven and earth? There is flesh and blood will not inherit the reign, but we hope in the resurrection of the flesh. So it's a very complicated issue where we have continuity and discontinuity. And the scientists were very strong, these were the cannonballs, you know. So if there is no continuity, we are out. Yeah? But then we opened interesting areas. Yeah? It cannot be mere speculation. So and it's a very simple model now that you shape the epistemologies and the methodological procedures according to the topical area and the warnings you get and the offers of a small bridge you can build, you get.
We'll come back in a moment, John. Yes, Jason, and then we'll come back to John. Yes.
Is the situation that we have, where we have such distinct disciplines who have to be brought together in such a contrived fashion, is it a result of polymathic scholarship becoming unfashionable, or even worse, that you can't get a job as a polymathic scholar? You have to be a specialist in one area or another. If we created a situation that several centuries ago wouldn't have been as big of a problem because individuals within themselves were capable of mastering a variety of disciplines.
Well, we have different levels of difficulty. In Germany, we do not have chairs in theology and science. In Great Britain and in the US, you have it. So there are not many career options, but there are some. In my own country, it's very, very complicated. So only with fear and trembling you can allow a doctoral student to do a dissertation in this area, or you have to warn and say, well, there is no academic position in the field. We also in Germany do not have the American type college system, where with the help of Templeton and others, they established a huge amount of courses in science and religion. And this, of course, then provides career schemes. So I think the Anglo-American world is a little bit better off in this direction, and I hope that we will follow with a few decades time delay in this direction. On the other hand, we of course want to make sure that our students and doctorate students are experts in their field and not dilettantes in many discourses. So this summer I was in theology economy, this summer in theology and science, this summer in theology and art, and so I think it is very, very important that we train our young scholars that they are really good experts in one field. And although I try to make sure that my best doctoral students have some experience in dialogue with biblical studies and with social and cultural studies on the one hand, if I want to bring their doctoral dissertation through the faculty, it has to be impeccable work on the Tillich or this topic or that author and so on, that stands to the rest of the international guild. This is the problem, and this is the dilemma. And so I think we can engage with the younger scholars only the best of our young scholars into this ambitious discourse.
John,
I just want to make a comment on your suggestion that why don't people lay their metaphysical and methodological cards on the table at the start. I think one of the reasons is that mostly we don't know what we've got in that way. And that emerges, I think, as Michael has been saying, in the course of the discussion. And one of the consequences that you draw from that is the discussion cannot satisfactorily be a one-shot encounter. It has to be reflexive, you have to meet again. In the intervening time, you've had the chance to think about where you're coming from, where the others are coming from. And it's that sort of iteration that we've found, haven't we, in the things we've been involved in, which has been so fruitful. And it's costly in time and resources, but it's very rewarding.
One of the resources I was able to bring to this discourse was a training in several philosophies. So most people think, oh, philosophy. Well, but Hegelian philosophy or Ficktinian or Whiteheadian or Thomasian also, they bring different worldviews, they bring different basic strategies, and in these discourses it is sometimes very important that you say, oh, we can draw from these and these sources, and with this help of this philosophy we can solve this problem, whereas another philosophy doesn't help us with this regard. So that's the problem with the meta discourse. If you have very simple subject, object, I, thou, very simple structures that you bring to this discourse, of course you can have the clue for all sorts of discourses. But if you have more refined problems, it is very, very crucial also in theology to zoom in on the right in the right context. We also try to read the biblical canon in a much more sophisticated way. That you say, well, it depends what kind of question you have, and then you go through the canonic traditions, which have been grown over 1,000 years, and some of the biblical authors are more under the impression that they live in chaos, and then they ask differently from God than those who have the feeling we are living under tyranny. And I think it's very important to have these worldviews and the concerns, and then the theoretical and methodological endeavors in your mind. Sometimes you simply cannot bring in a philosophy or a theological tradition to help to solve a specific problem. And the wisdom of a good interdisciplinary group is that you have scholars which speak a few languages, so to speak, theory languages, and say, well, in this case, I would propose to work with these and these and these subtopics, these tools, and suddenly you get a mosaic that then allows you to build these small bridges. This is the great joy.
Yes.
Can I ask a simple question of history, please? And having heard your answer, if I could just come back with a little comment on it. Would you happen to know, in Heidelberg of the 1920s and 30s, was there much interest in this kind of multidisciplinary linking? I'm thinking of the legacy of Marianne Weber, Max Weber, Alfred Weber, for example.
Yeah.
Was there in fact a lot of interest?
Oh, yeah.
1920s, 1930s?
Yeah. I think that Heidelberg is, if I might say so, famous for great interdisciplinary openness. Yeah. When I taught in Münster, I did a three-semester doctoral seminar with a colleague from the law school.
Yeah.
And so colleagues approached me and said, well, you haven't been dean yet. So the idea was, first you have to be dean, then you sit in the Senate, then you meet colleagues from other fields, and then you should be there to have a seminar together. And when I came to Heidelberg, it was immediately, we are doing with Egyptology or theology and science, so we are doing these interdisciplinary things. And it was the result of the 20s. It was Max and Marianne Weber. They had these open Sunday meetings where they brought the discipline, but also in the sciences, Kirchner and others, they created the multi-field discourse groups, and this really then went on. I had a colleague, Dietrich Ritsche. He was wonderful in building this. When we got our 600th anniversary, nothing against Cambridge, but when we in Heidelberg turned 600 years, we got a very nice center for international interdisciplinary research activities, where we have 50 to 70 research events per year. So I think it's really an intentional cultivation of these encounters.
Might I come back on that one now,
Please.
The reason for my question, thank you, was that I've been very interested in the work of Karl Mannheim, who came out of Heidelberg, went to Frankfurt with his colleague Norbert Elias. Yeah. They both fled from Frankfurt in the 1930s for all the obvious reasons that we know of. They were not part of the Marxburg in Frankfurt, I have to say that, because people commonly assume that they were here in England. Now, the interesting thing for me, just to come back with your point in focus, is that Mannheim's correspondence has recently been published in German and in English, and it shows that he had a much broader interest in these very topics which you are naming. Elias, who established himself here and lived a much longer life, because Mannheim, as you know, was dead by 1946, but he established a whole field of inquiry which has had a very powerful impact. Norbert Elias was hostile to the inclusion of religious topics that you mentioned, and I was just interested in how the two men who worked as colleagues in Heidelberg and then in Frankfurt went such widely differing paths.
Very interesting.
It is interesting.
Well, we had these scholars, I quoted Bultmann, who were this split word. Here's the sciences, out there has nothing to do what we are doing in theology, and then very simplistic duals, objectivity, and here the existential questions and so on. So we always have these different minds, these open minds who are willing to engage, and other minds who have, maybe with good reasons, in order to protect their field or what they think is protecting their field, close all the windows and all the doors.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we have these different minds, and of course, fascism then destroyed a lot of this. So we had these creative phases in the 20s, and then in the 30s, you saw this traumatized country and all this ideology creeping in, and then all the subtlety of these multidisciplinary discourses. The Jews played a very strong role in the academy, and they were either killed or fled Germany. So you saw this steep decline in this vibrant discourse. And we saw then in the US a wonderful development. When Whitehead moved to Harvard, he worked in this multidisciplinary way, and he did seminars with Tucker Parsons, I only discovered that recently, this sociologist who, and they generated scholars like Susanne Langer in aesthetics, and she had Clifford Geertz, and so these were multidisciplinary thinkers in different levels of sophistication, who had a powerful impact on leading minds. And then Germany was out of this game for many years, and it was a very long recovery.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, question.
Can you say a bit more about why you think biologists are so much more aggressive than physical scientists?
Well, there are different notions of life, you know. So some people in the religious area, also in the ecumeny, when they speak of life, they get these glowing eyes and say, "Oh, life is wonderful." But you can also say, "Well, what is life? Life lives at the expense of other life." Yeah. So life is a robbery and requires justification. And that's the basis of religion. That's a vital quote, by the way. And I think the biologists bring in these hard facts in a much stronger way. But for us theologians, then this becomes interesting. So if you are not just a theist, yeah, God controls everything, but when you look at these deeper things, then you see suddenly, creation as sustenance is not enough. So we need rescue. And rescue just to bring life back on track is not enough. It will die again. So we need annulment, elevation. So suddenly you see what the theological minds with the Trinitarian notion, you know, so creation, sustenance, salvation, Christology, rescue, the spirit of the annulment had in mind. And first, if you just have a kind of simple mind theological, philosophical theism and a physicist theism, and you converge, and you have the feeling, well, you know, the clockwork universe is wonderful, then you can have your wonderful interdisciplinary dialogue, and you get stuck in your dark room. Yeah? And now you look at these deeper things, and the biologists come in and say, well, please take a closer look at life and bring in these parameters. Then we have to dig in deeper, bring in more interesting insights, and also in the physicists. Then we'll talk about not just a smooth evolution, but these kind of interesting steps, not only in the cognitive evolution, but also in the physical universe, and so on. And then we are on deeper levels of investigation and insight.
Can I just, as a biologist, perhaps I can just add a comment on this as well. I mean, I think actually the discussion between biologists and theology is thriving and fruitful and positive if one stands back and takes a slightly longer term view, you know, sort of bigger picture view. I think it just so happens there are one or two powerful voices, no names mentioned, who are not engaged in a positive way in that dialogue, in fact rather the opposite direction. And that sort of coloured the media image in the waters at the moment in a way that probably doesn't reflect the reality, the academic reality of a long-term discussion between biology and theology, which I think is very fruitful and which has a very long history. So, but it's a little bit submerged, and it doesn't always appear perhaps in the public domain as much as it could do. So.
Another point, I see we are running out of time, but another point where we really got big challenges in theology was, for a long time, those of us who have been trained in the philosophical tradition, in anthropology just zoomed in theories of self-consciousness. Yeah. Theories of self-consciousness, this was the control instance from where you oversaw, like sitting in the crane, you know, so here you steer the anthropology. Now, with brain research, genome research, all these gigantic successes in biology and the alliance between biology and chemistry and so on, we have to get up. Yeah? So we have to investigate much more closely the phenomena of anthropology. And lo and behold, we see, well, why did we dismiss the dimensions of the heart, the soul, the spirit? Everything was driven away. Yeah? Now when we do not want to be caught by a scientific mind saying, oh, the brain does everything, or the genome does everything, we better work on deeper levels of anthropological research and insights. And so we have to activate traditions that we had already cleared out because we had such a nice philosophy that on a cognitive level offered us so much control in anthropological issues, which didn't work. So here you see how interdisciplinary things open new windows in a discourse which had been historically shut. Because other fields were so dominant and said, well, if you want to build a trustworthy theology, please go with Fichte and existentialism into this kind of anthropological theory.
I think we'll finish there. Thank you very much indeed, Michael, for a wonderful overview and very, very stimulating talk. So thank you very much.